just because you have fun with somebody, just because you like being around them, just because you're both attracted to each other, doesn't mean that they're your person. And
Mhm.
it's okay that someone's not our person. And I think something we also see clinically are people trying to fix or change someone to become that person. You shouldn't have to work to make someone be more compatible in your life.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today I'm sitting down with someone who I really look up to as a human being. She is another licensed mental health counselor, and she was actually one of my professors in grad school. So I had the opportunity to sit down with Jen Weaver, who is the owner of Polaris Counseling, and talk through so many rich topics. We talked about the idea of failing in your 20s and being okay with being bad at things, and that anything that you do in your 20s is never a waste, but you're going to learn from it, you're going to grow from it, and you're going to get better from it. And we also are talking about dating in your 20s and the complexities of it. And we talk about narcissistic partners and what shows up for you in dating. So I think there's a lot of good nuggets of information in this episode, and I hope you enjoy it just as much as I did. Real quick, guys, before we dive into today's episode, I am a licensed counselor associate, but I'm not your personal counselor. The information shared on this podcast is for educational and inspirational purposes only and is not intended to replace or substitute professional counseling. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out for help. The 988 hotline is available for a suicide and crisis lifeline. You don't have to walk this life alone. Let's jump into today's episode. Jen, if you could go back and tell yourself something in your 20s, what would you go back and tell yourself?
That there's time, that there's time to figure it out. There's time to not know what you want or what you want to do. I think we are socialized to believe that there's this timeline, right? That we have to figure out our careers by a certain age. We have to figure out our person by a certain age. We have to figure out our friends by a certain age or even ourselves by a certain age. That's not real. You have time, right? I had my first son when I was 37. I don't even think I knew myself until I was 34, 35, when I had the opportunity to actually stop and learn about myself. And I don't even think I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my career until I was in my 30s. And even then, you still have time. So if you're listening to this in your 30s, there's still time. There's no set timeline for your life and how it needs to happen. And I think we need to stop putting that pressure on people.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. It creates a lot of pressure for all of us to kind of, I don't know, just like put ourselves in these boxes, and they're just arbitrary boxes that we find ourselves in. And I think it's so refreshing for you even to share that with us, that you had your first baby at 37. Like, wow. Like, I mean, that is becoming more common, but even there's just a pressure of like, I feel behind. So I would love for you to kind of talk to us about your journey of how did you get into the field of counseling?
Well, and it kind of ties back to that because I knew at 16 or 17 that I was really interested in the brain. So I knew that I wanted to either go into counseling or psychiatry or something. And by the time I got to college, I was still kind of on the fence about that, but I absolutely loved the classes. And I was convinced I wanted to work with kids. So I worked at a local children's psychiatric hospital. And turns out I'm actually really horrible at working with kids. They're fabulous. I love my kid. I don't really want to work with yours. It is just not my thing. And I had worked at a children's psychiatric hospital. I worked in child protective services. And I said, this really isn't what I want to do. And I needed something a little bit less stressful. So I became a prison therapist. I was a prison therapist for about a decade. And I loved it. I love the adult mind. I love the adult brain. And then about 10 years ago, I went into private practice just to I wasn't really looking for state work. So I opened a private practice. And from there, I started seeing people pre and post incarceration, which I still really love to do. And somehow that really flowed into working with first responders. So now I work primarily with first responders. Not entirely sure how that connection happened, but it did. And that is the population that right now my cup is super satisfied and filled with. And I didn't even find that until I was over a decade into my career. So I think part of this whole journey, right, is even figuring out like where you go in your field, whatever that field is, understanding that you don't even need to know that specifically, that in and of itself is a journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for just sharing all that. And I think it's so interesting too, like where you start off in your field is probably not where you're going to end up. And I think that's what drew me to the field of counseling was it had options. And that gave me just a level of like I could take a deep breath because knowing if I start with one specific population and I may not end up loving it, just like you with kids, like there are options, and I think that can really go many career fields. And I would love for you to kind of chat on that a little bit more of like the people that, people in our 20s that we feel like if we enter into something, like we can kind of feel like we boxed ourselves in there. And can you kind of talk about how that might not be the case?
I think there's a few things. I think one, it's super important to know what you don't like as much as you know what you like, right? So when we start college, when we graduate college, most of us are 22, 23 years old. You might get your master's degree by the time you're 25 or 26 if you go right into grad school. Your frontal lobe's not even fully developed until you're between the ages of 21 and 25, right? Depending on your sex. To ask someone to know enough about themselves to make a lifelong decision prior to having a fully developed frontal lobe doesn't make sense. But we need to look at the generations before us. The generations before us were having kids by 20, they were married by 19. They had a sweet low interest mortgage by the age of 21, right? It was just a different time. Okay. And we are looking at an era of a higher level of college graduates, more people getting their master's degrees, more people owning their own businesses, and people really deciding that it is not selfish to figure out what they want in this life, what fills their cup, and what will genuinely make them happy. And I think part of that too is you are better to the people around you. You are better for the people around you when you are also taking care of yourself, right? And you are figuring out the things that make you happy. So I think there's this timeline that we need to push away from. You absolutely get to know what you don't like as much as you know what you like. You have time to figure out who you are. And I think we have moved away from the era of someone becoming a company man, right? Where they took a job, they worked there for 30 or 40 years, they retired. What we saw that was a really high rate of occupational dissatisfaction. We actually saw a lot of people going to therapy because they were wildly unhappy with their jobs, but they felt like because they had selected one, they had to stay there forever. That's not a rule. That is an arbitrary thing that got passed along that people decided was a rule. You absolutely get to enjoy what you do. And if you're sitting here at 25, 28, 30 years old and you're saying, I already dread my job, don't do that for another 35 years. For what? What are you doing? Go find what makes you happy.
So good. Again, there's just so much you just touched on there. I feel like what can be tricky about that is like generationally it has changed very quickly of I can even think of my parents of like basically when you were like you said 19, you go out, you pick a career and that is what you do until you retire, right? And you don't question it. If you question it, like now that's a problem. So I feel like the challenge here though is those are influences on our life. Like that generation is like the people who are speaking into our lives. So that's the way that they were raised was to go get this career that they stuck it through, and now they're the ones influencing us. So I think that's where a lot of the maybe duplicity can come from because you're kind of like you have to challenge basically your own beliefs. But kind of like you're saying, I am a strong believer of go figure out what you don't want to do. I shared that on last week's podcast that my mom would always say that I have a list of what I don't want to do, which is much bigger than the list of what I do want to do. And I feel like that comes with like, you have to push back. Like you're kind of saying, you have to push back on what you were raised around. Like, and then also even like society, because I got labeled as like I was flaky or I just trying something new, and like those things, I'm
Right.
not gonna lie, they have stuck with me over time. Like I've even thought, well, I'm in this career. Oh, is this just like another, side quest that I'm trying? But that it's just like part of your path, right? Like I don't think there's anything ever wasted.
Mhm. And I think we can apply the same concept to dating when we're talking about timelines, right? I think we were looking at much higher rates of divorce in previous generations because people were getting married at 19, 20 years old. And some of those couples, my parents have been together since they were 15. My parents are 65. They've been together for 50 years. They are each other's best friends. That's not the average story, though, right? So I'm super happy that that happened for them. But that's not the average story. The average story is that people have to know what works for them and what doesn't, whether we're talking about jobs or we're talking about who your future partner is. And to expect us in our 20s to know everything that's going to work for us for the next 60, 70 years is unrealistic and unfair. And I think it pigeonholes people into making decisions that maybe are not going to work for them at some point in their lives.
That is a very, very good point. And I don't think that's something I really have put too much thought of in like just kind of like you're saying, same generationally, like you go and you pick a career, you stick with it. And same with like, oh, you go basically like my parents met when my mom was 19, like, and you stick it through regardless. And it's like, yeah, okay. Like, and I think our generation is starting to really challenge that. And like that's part of the reason that we are getting married later and we're not settling down because we're trying to like date people and figure it out along the way. So I would love to kind of talk about just dating as a whole in our 20s. I would love to know what are some of the like the toxic patterns or just patterns in general that we can see coming up when we are in our 20s with dating relationships.
Think there's this really great thing about meeting people on apps and meeting them online, right? We're meeting people that maybe are not in our friend circle, maybe don't live within 2 miles of our homes, maybe you're not under the influence when they're talking to us because we're not out at a bar or whatever. I think what we're seeing though are patterns of people forgetting how to connect as human beings, though. Lots and lots of people come to counseling to talk about dating and what the dating world is like right now. And this concept of how severe rejection can be for people when they are ghosted, um, when someone turns out to be a little inauthentic, and genuinely not knowing how to communicate and talk with each other because we now kind of allow for that. And I think the way I kind of liken it to my patients is listen, if in 1993 you went to a bar, you would be speaking to one person at a time. The app is like sitting in a bar and you're on a rotating bar stool and you're talking to 8 people in a circle at a time, right? And you're like rotating and talking to all of them. And there's a pro to that. I'm a big believer that you need to figure out who you are more compatible with. I'm a big believer in compatibility when it comes to dating, right? And not just attraction. But I think what we're taking away from is the ability to be attracted to people, right? And just to touch on science, you need to sniff someone's pheromones to be attracted to them. So I
Mhm.
think this is why people meet online, they meet in real life, and then they're like, wow, there was no spark. And it's like, right, you don't like how they smell. Or your brain doesn't like how they smell, right?
Right.
So there's got to be this sort of middle ground between like what are the things that are available to us that really are allowing us to access people, but we also have to continue to learn how to communicate as human beings and treat people as human beings, because just because someone is on the other side of an app or the other side of a phone doesn't make them any less of a quality human than they would be if you met them out in public with your friends.
Yeah. No, I think you're 100% spot on, and I think there needs to be a little bit of the middle ground, right? Of like, because 'cause we're kinda talking about the past generation and how they dated and now how we get to date, and like you said, we get options, we get to get outside of, exactly what you're saying, dating someone 2 miles down the road from your hometown. You get to finally, leave your hometown, hopefully, and there's those pros to it, but then I think there are some things that we could take with us of just how, like, human decency. And in today's day and age, like, I would say, obviously, the cons of dating is just, like, this idea that there's could be just someone better for you, like, there's just so many options for you, and, like, you're not even investing your time into getting to know someone because you're already swiping
Yes.
to the person. So I think that I feel like as somebody who's in the dating world, I think that's kind of like what's missing. Like you said, it feels like there's missing this authentic connection with people and that it feels like you're treated as very disposable, like just on to the next. So I guess I kind of wanted to a little bit more about like how do we navigate this? Like how I mean it sounds like it's more of a societal problem really than anything we're going to solve here. But what's the encouragement to the people in our 20s who are in the dating world?
Dating is a process. Dating is a luxury, right? Dating is this idea that like I genuinely get to meet people who I hope I'm compatible with, and then I get to see if that compatibility is true. And dating is work. So I think kind of what you said, where people are always looking for the next best thing, it's stopping people from dating, right? So people are swiping until they're landing on a person where they're saying, like, this is the absolute perfect person for me. And that may be true, right? I want you to find your perfect person. But in doing that, we actually need to invest in interactions with people. We need to have authentic conversations and actually spend time with people. And dating should exist for a reason, right? I think something that I see as a clinician, and you may be able to vouch on this as a clinician, but Patients will come to me about dating and they will come to me one day and they'll say, I met him. And in my head, I think, she's going to come back in 90 days and tell me they live together. And then she comes back in 90 days and tells me they live together. There's this expedited journey that people are on when they are dating, right? In which we have stopped courting. We have stopped enjoying each other. We have stopped getting to know each other. We are just moving very rapidly through the phases. And as a result, you are continually looking for what's better. And I do want you to find the person who's best for you. But in doing that, you genuinely have to interact and invest and engage in people. It can't just be about moving very rapidly through the system, because that is the society that we live in right now, right? That is what's normalized right now. And I think it is harmful to people. Dating is a luxury. Enjoy it. Enjoy dating. Learn what works for you. Learn what does not work for you. The only way you learn what doesn't work for you in a relationship is by having experiences, right?
Right.
And if you are not allowing those experiences to happen, whether that is someone who is aligned with me politically, socially, spiritually, whatever it may be, if I'm not having genuine interactions with you, I will never know that.
Yeah, and I was honestly gonna say that too about, like, when I was talking about society, I was gonna bring up the microwave culture that we live in. Everything's expedited, everything but we want instant gratification like that. If it's not that, it's foreign to us. So we are, like, going so fast, and I think another thing we left in the past was the idea of courting, getting to know somebody, enjoying that time of dating, not rushing into fully living together. And then when you decide that, "Oh, there's probably something, better out there than me than this because we're facing conflict now," then they're just, again, that disposable, like, "See you later," and then you're kind of going through this, like, mini divorce that you never, like, actually signed up for, because you were doing all the luxuries of a marriage without being in it, and now you're like, "God," and now you're just, like, practicing divorce, but that's a side tangent, but I think my process behind all of that was just because of the society we live in, everything is very, like, sped up, Amazon Prime is at your door the next day, and we're kind of expecting that with our spouse.
Right. And social media does that as well, right? Like, don't forget, like, everyone you follow on social media, myself included, it's curated, right? So you're not seeing your friends get into fights. You're not seeing how they speak to each other. You're not seeing how actually incompatible they may be. You're just saying, like, wow, I want her life. She met this guy. He's adorable and he's already proposing to her. And it's like, yeah, but what you don't know is that they're actually a horrible fit and he's a horrible human being, because social media doesn't allow for that. So I think that's expediting the process as well, because it's showing us something that's false. I mean, even right now, like, I have a filter on my screen and Botox in my face. Like, it's not real. Nothing's real. And when we curate those things, we allow people to see something different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think authenticity and just, I guess, transparency are gonna be the new currencies. That's my prediction of,
Right.
like, because I feel like that's
Yeah, I
what's
like
been
that.
for a while. So that's just, I think, even on social media, showing up like that is gonna get you, like, further, and same with dating. I think that's, like, one of the things that I look for. Like, that's one of my currencies in dating is finding that person who is authentic, transparent, and down to earth because I don't know. That matters a lot to me.
Absolutely.
Common sense, but okay. So, on this topic of dating and social media, I think something that I'm seeing just like so much, and I've definitely seen so many books about this, is the topic of narcissism. And I think I want to create a book that everybody's a narcissist because I feel like anytime you're talking about like a toxic guy, girl, everyone's like, yeah, they're a narcissist. So I would love for us to kind of just chat about what really is a narcissistic person, how to spot one, and maybe how did you get into this situation?
Right. So a narcissist or someone with narcissism is a clinical diagnosis, right? Somebody with narcissism is someone who has ideas of grandeur, really believes they are never wrong. They do not suffer with things like insecurity. They are people who really can think about themselves and will do good things for you if it benefits them. Okay. It's a clinical disorder, it is a personality disorder. You are not changing anyone. That being said, whether they're a narcissist or not, stop trying to change anybody. That is actually not what dating is about. But I think a lot of people have narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic behaviors because we live in a narcissistic person forward society, right? We do live in a society where I think We have raised a lot of people to not be accountable for certain things. We have an entire generation of people who struggle with verbal communication. So as a result, it's really hard for them to resolve. They move away when there's conflict. Like you mentioned earlier, there's conflict, I move on to the next. When you move on to the next, every time there's conflict, you don't learn how to have conflict, right?
Yeah.
So I think we hear people say, like, they didn't treat me well, they were a narcissist. And it's like, statistically, they're probably narcissists. They maybe weren't a good person for you. I don't disagree that you should have ended the relationship, but somebody being selfish, somebody not treating you well, might just be more of some sort of psychological abuse and not necessarily narcissism.
Mm. Yeah. I think, we've been talking about this, how our culture is, changing and it's very, along with the change, it's become very self forward, right? And I think it feels easier. This is my personal opinion. Sometimes it feels easier to slap a label on them. And like you said, it's not a bad thing that you're choosing to move on. But I think it's easier to slap the label on them than to figure out kind of like what's showing up inside of you. So it's easier for us to be like, yep, they're a narcissist. Again, clinically, statistically, probably not. But it's easier to do that. And then instead of maybe looking at what's actually going inside of you, like what's being triggered right now, like what is showing up inside of you, What's your thoughts on that?
Right, and identifying what you need. So if you are someone who needs daily texting with the person you're dating, that's okay. If you are dating someone who you've asked repeatedly to text you more often and they don't, that doesn't necessarily make them a narcissist. It makes them a person who's incapable of filling that need for you. And that's okay. It's okay to find someone who has a communication style similar to yours, right? So I think we can slap a label on it, right? I think it takes away from real narcissistic abuse. I think it diminishes that a bit. But I think really what we need to look at is, you're right, what is that triggering inside of me? Why is that upsetting to me? Because maybe that is speaking to something that I need. And when we're talking about compatibility, sometimes we're talking about, I need someone who can fill my cup or love me in the way that I need to be loved, right? Lots of couples sit on my couch and they've been together 15, 20 years. And they'll say things like, I've been asking him for 20 years if we can eat dinner together at night. And he still is not making that a priority. He's not going to. And I'm not saying one is wrong or one is right. What I am saying is you two chose to be together for 2 decades, knowing that you were two people who are not willing to or incapable of meeting each other's needs, right? So I think when we're triggered by that stuff, we need to say, like, what is it that I'm recognizing that I need in a partner? The person you're dating isn't necessarily a narcissist because they have boys' nights 3 nights a week. Maybe you want to date someone who doesn't have boy night 3 nights a week. That's okay. You get to choose that. That's not your person though. We don't get to get angry at that person for not changing their lifestyle. We just need to find someone who's compatible for ours.
Yeah. No, that's so good. I feel like that's something that's getting lost is just the idea of meeting someone exactly where they are today and like looking at that for, does this person work for me? And do I want to pick this person? I think we can get so caught up of we want that person to pick us. And I think that might be, channeling a wound inside of us, but we lack to think of, do I want to choose this person for who they are today, for what they're showing me today? And I think that is what, like, in a sense, like love is like choosing to accept somebody for who they are, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Mhm, mhm.
I think, like, because I just feel like when you're receiving love, there's nothing better to be loved for exactly who you are and someone not asking you, I would love you if you changed or whatever. I think it's a lot easier. Like if someone would said
Right.
to me, I would love you more if you didn't have girls' nights 3 days a week. And I was like, okay, but like that's what I'm choosing. You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like you're trying to manipulate me to be someone that I'm not because I like having girls' nights 3 nights a week. I'm
Mhm.
not saying there's not compromise in relationship. Let's say that, okay? There is compromise that can always
Yeah.
be made, but I think just being real and honest of, is the person that's in front of you, is there someone that you actually like? Or are you trying to mold them into someone that you want them to be?
And I think that's a big piece of it, right? I think people are trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole, right? Just because you have fun with somebody, just because you like being around them, just because you're both attracted to each other, doesn't mean that they're your person. And it's okay that someone's not our person. And I think something we also see clinically are people trying to fix or change someone to become that person. You shouldn't have to work to make someone be more compatible in your life.
Yeah.
That is not real. right? And I think this idea of, well, I'm going to teach him how to communicate or I'm going to teach him how to love. Like, you are not his mom. That's not your job. And I think, again, you're right. There's a difference between compromise. There's a difference between someone in our lives being like, hey, I only have Thursday nights off and I know you normally have girls' night, but I would love to see you next week on Thursday. And you saying like, yeah, I'd really like to see you too. Like, yeah, let's do that. Let's make plans on Thursday versus somebody saying like, I need you to change this for me or I'm going to be really upset. Those are not the same two things. And I think we've got to get away from fixing and changing
Mm,
because what ends up happening is that's not sustainable. And then you're sitting on my couch 15, 20 years into the relationship and you're telling me about the fight you've been having since you were 3 months dating. It's like, well, right. Because you guys aren't actually each other's person.
right. Yeah, and I think there is something beautiful about recognizing all of what we're saying, right? And, like, allowing that person like, letting them go because if not, like, you're gonna create so much resentment for this person. Whether you're gonna create resentment trying to change them, and they're not, and they're gonna resent you for you trying to make them into something that they're not. Like, I think it would like, the better choice, the harder choice, but maybe the better choice is to let the person go and let them be with someone who doesn't feel like they need to maybe change them at all, which amazing, fantastic if you find that, but or someone that is
Right,
just
right.
more compatible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and also because you deserve to find someone who's a better fit for you.
Mm,
You deserve to not have to create your person. Like, you deserve to not have to work for that. You deserve to be loved and respected exactly as the way you are. You don't need to create that within somebody else. You don't deserve to have to put that work in.
right. Yeah, it makes me think of, like, even us as clinicians, like, one of our sayings is, like, "Don't work harder than the client is." If you do, like, you'll burn out, and you can't do more than they're willing to do for themselves, and I think the same principle applies in dating. Don't work at the relationship harder than either the other person is not meeting you to work at it, or they're not meeting themselves to work on themselves.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. That would save people a lot of grief.
Yeah. I think I kinda wanna chat about, like because I think this is a really beautiful conversation, and I hope that it instills hope in people that, like, if you are that person right now that's trying to change your partner, like, maybe looking at yourself and being like, "Oh, okay, is this actually working?" Like, radical acceptance, right? But I kinda wanna chat a little bit more about how to like, what really keeps us stuck in these, like, maybe toxic relationships? Because I think while I'm saying all this, it sounds a lot easier said than being even a person that has sat in that seat and being so, like, afraid to let go or so, like, you're just so caught up in it. So I kind of want to give some, I don't know, either tangible tips or just dive into a little bit more of, like, speak to that person that's on your couch.
Listen, I say this a lot. I say no relationship works until the one that does. Every relationship ends until the one that doesn't, right? We need to stop seeing ended or previous relationships as failures. We need to start seeing them as things we recognized that did not work for us. And not to be one more person on a podcast who mentions Taylor Swift, but whether you love her or hate her music, that's not the point. My point being, she got a lot of grief for how many songs she wrote about people she dated and then would date someone else. Yeah, yes, that's exactly what dating should be. You don't necessarily need to write songs about them, but I think this idea that like if a relationship does not work for you, then you do not have to stay stuck. It is not a failure to accept that doesn't something doesn't work for you. For example, like I am not in my best shape when I do cardio. I'm in my best shape when I do strength training, right? It's okay that I had to do cardio to learn that that actually wasn't what worked best for me, that I actually had to add strength training. I didn't fail at cardio, right? We don't actually apply that to anything else in our lives except dating. This idea that if I move on from a relationship, even if it makes me sad, that that's a failure, right? We have to make mistakes to move forward. You do not have to see mistakes as failure in any capacity of your life, but particularly in dating. We just have to see them as a pivot, right? That's not working for me. I need to pivot away from that and I need to move on. And I think the other thing too is we've asked people to close, a room full of people, close your eyes, raise your hand if you would rather be in a bad relationship than no relationship at all. And people would rather be in a bad relationship. They'll admit that. And we have put value on people as to whether or not they're taken, right? And we have started to diminish this concept of being single, this idea that you don't have as much value. So I also think people feel embarrassed to end relationships and move on, or they're not ready to move on until they feel like they have another relationship ready to go, and that's dangerous too, right? And what that's not allowing for is people to really understand themselves.
Absolutely. I think yeah, absolutely. I think there's this fear of being alone, fear of the unknown, and I think that can those 2 fears can set you up for a lot of maybe bad choices. I think the jumping from to relationships very, very common. And like you said, there was never a time for self-reflection of your growth edges in that relationship when you left it. Taking that time to kind of look at how did you show up in the relationship? What would you do different moving forward? And just I feel like just even getting your footing again, right? And then the other side of the concept is the fear of the unknown, kind of heading out like, letting go I keep hearing this concept of, like, swimming out from shore, and it's easier to turn back to the shore because you can still see it instead of venturing out until you can't see the shore anymore, and you have to keep swimming to the other side. Like, I feel like as humans, like, we're always, like, so ready to go back to the comfortable and go back to what we've known. So it's that fear of heading out into I don't know when I'm gonna meet somebody else. And I think that can be really, like, scary and, keep us where we have always been.
Right, and we fear what we don't know, right? And that's an evolutionary process. This idea that, we find comfort in the familiar because at least I know what it is, right? And if we go back thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, there's fear in trying a new berry because it might knock you out, right? So you stick to the berries that you know. That's a part of our animal brain, and when we are uncomfortable, our animal brain signals a threat message, and what we need to learn is that discomfort's not actually a threat, it's not actually a risk, right? And if you've ever had a dog or a cat and you've put a collar on them for the first time, sometimes they freak out because it's uncomfortable, but we know that that collar is actually the best thing for them and that they're not actually in pain. They're just unfamiliar with it. So they're panicking a little bit. It's like when you put shoes on a baby for a first time. I don't know if you've ever seen that. They act like you just lit their feet on fire and they start ripping at the shoes. They're not in pain. They're just uncomfortable. They've never worn shoes, right? So it's this idea of sometimes we have to tell the animal part of our brain that I'm uncomfortable because this is unfamiliar. I'm not uncomfortable because this is a threat. And I actually need to go
Mm,
experience this thing.
wow, that's good. Yeah, and, like, I love the saying, like, "Be scared and do it anyways," like, kinda just taking that, like, fear along with you for the ride, like and I think something that practical that we can do is kind of like we're mentioning, like it doesn't feel safe. And what like this is like what I'm asking myself is like, what are the ways that you can provide that like safety to yourself? Because we so very often seek it outside of ourselves. And that might be why we like get right into another relationship, right? We're looking for that like sense of safety because it's so scary. But like what is a way that we can pause and, give ourselves that sense of safety? If we are able to provide ourselves that, like, sense of safety, then we are able to kind of endure that fear and endure maybe some of the pain that comes with being on our own, and, like, we are kind of mentioning this world that makes it seem like being single is bad or being single makes you less valuable.
Yeah, I think this idea of we've subscribed to the idea of the pain of being alone. Like you can be alone. And I think there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, right? Sometimes I physically want to be alone and sometimes I feel lonely. And that's when I feel like I'm not connecting with people, right? But something that we know about feeling lonely is that there's a way to fix that. There are lots of people who make us not feel lonely, and it shouldn't just be one romantic relationship that we're in. And when that is what we rely on, we start to see people genuinely fearing being single. And when you're
Yeah.
fearing being single, you are far more likely to stay in a relationship that causes you actual damage and pain. The pain of being single is not damage causing, right? It is maybe fear based. It is maybe working on how I see myself, but being in a toxic relationship, being in a manipulative relationship, being in an unhealthy relationship for us actually does damage. And that is a far
Yeah.
different pain.
Yeah. That those types of relationships can come with trauma that you're gonna have to spend some time unraveling, undoing, and like you said, that is more damaging than being on your own and learning who you are. Even though that's scary too, it's a different kind of scary.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so we're kind of talking about this concept of like relationships and ending relationships and trying not to see them as failures and instead see them as growth and growth opportunities. So I would love to open up this concept a little bit more just in general for us in our 20s that just because, again, with either careers, relationships, whatever it may be, just because it didn't maybe go the way you planned, it doesn't mean it was a failure. What are your
Right.
thoughts on that?
That's the concept of growth mindset. The growth mindset is this concept that I have to make mistakes, I have to fail at things in order to grow, right? If I, for example, if the first step my kid takes, if he just starts running and he's fantastic at it, he actually never learns how to get up when he falls down. He never actually learns how to adapt or do things differently if something isn't working. We have to fail at things. Think about when you learned long division in like third grade, whenever we learn long division. You have to mess up in order to learn how to do things, right? We have to fall, we have to fail. And we try to avoid failures. And sure, to an extent, we want to be successful, but also you cannot grow if you don't fail. You cannot grow if you do not fall. That is not real. So those things, whether it's in dating, whether it's in your personal life, or it's in your occupation, all of those things have to occur so that you can continue to grow forward. There is a luxury in failing.
Yeah. I mean, I love that what you just said, like grow forward. Like another thing that is coming to my mind too, as we're kind of saying all this, like if you ever played ice hockey, like one of the first things you have to do, like when you're learning to play ice hockey, is like when you get on the ice, full pads on, it's just like fall down, get up, fall down, get up, fall down, get up. Have someone come push you down because what that is teaching you is it's actually not scary to fall down. And if you don't do that, you're gonna spend the next hour on the ice trying to just hold yourself up and, like, you're so scared to fall that you're not even learning another skill on the ice or you're not learning, you know, anything because the only thing you're focusing on is not falling down because you don't wanna get hurt. And it's
Right.
I feel like that concept is, like, the same here of if we just even like let ourselves fall down, let ourselves fail, one, we would learn that it's not that scary as we made it out to be. Like when you're like, oh my God, if I fall on the ice, like that's going to hurt. So you fall, you have full pads on, you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. And then two, you learn how to get up. And that's very important on the ice and in life. Like when you fail, you learn how to get up and fall forward. You learn from your mistakes.
Yeah, you get to fail. There's nothing wrong in failing. You would learn absolutely nothing if you didn't fail. And my goal in life, at least, is to not be such a perfect version of myself. My goal in life is to continue to grow. Like, how boring is life if we stop growing and stop learning, and just kind of exist where we're at? I don't want to exist where I'm at right now. I want to continue, right? And I can't do that if I'm not accepting the things that are flawed or that I can do differently because I learned to grow from those things.
Hmm. Yeah. So, I guess how do you or someone sitting on your couch and they come in and they're like just paralyzed by fear of maybe like taking a step and they're so scared of the failure and the rejection that might come with it. Like walk me through on how you would walk someone through that.
I mean, part of what we walk people through is, one, we talk about the other ways you've been rejected and failed and how you've survived all those, right?
Mm,
Two, we talk about, like, you can continue to be scared, but you also have to be okay with being stuck. That's a choice, right? So not taking the risk is a choice. Feeling scared isn't, but not taking the risk is a choice. And you can choose that. You just have to be okay with that never changing for you, for your reality not changing. So until you are ready to take the risk and teach your brain that it's not actually a threat, you are choosing to stay exactly where you are. And plenty of people do. They go their entire lives exactly where they are. And that's okay if that is what you want. But if you're saying that it's not what you want, then you have to actively push yourself through that and do the really scary stuff. And that means you're going to fail and it means you're rejected. And that is how you're going to move forward. They're necessary.
yeah. Would your advice be to somebody who's like, I don't know, maybe thinking about stepping out into a new career field, like maybe starting a business, would your advice be for them to maybe start making like small choices towards like risks, like whether that be, I don't know, something very, very small? Or would you kind of challenge them to jump into the deep ocean and like kind of go all in? Like, what would be your advice there? Would it be to take baby risks and, like, see that there's proof in that, like, you can grow from all those small things and then to kind of over time build that reputation in yourself? Or would your, advice be to go all in?
I think it depends on the logistics, right? So if financially you have the luxury to jump into a new career, do it. I want to see if it works. Worst case scenario is it doesn't work, right? If you're thinking about opening a business, if you're thinking, I be all in. right? We can't make something work that we're not 100% in. It just, that's not real. I think if you're at a place where you're like, listen, I can't. I have kids, I have a mortgage, I have student loans, I have whatever it may be. Okay, take baby risks. Start taking baby steps. Start doing that career on the weekends. Start doing that career at night. Start shadowing that job. Start doing it part time. Start seeing what works for you. Sitting around thinking about it does nothing for you. Just find a way to do it, whether that's in baby steps or that's a big leap. You will probably never be on your deathbed saying, your last thought on your deathbed will probably never be, I wish I hadn't risked that new career. But it
Right.
might be something like, I wish I had taken more risks in my life because I was actually really unhappy.
And I definitely agree with you. Like, you have to be all in on, you need to have the most belief in whatever it is that you're doing, or why would the universe, why would anyone else believe in it if even if you don't? So I think that's like a big piece of it. And I'm also a believer of like lighting a torch to your backup plan because that's like you being all in. But at the same time, like if it is like starting a business, like even though it's paralyzingly scary, like knowing you have a skill set, you can always go get a job again. Like there is like that comfort too that might be able to support you in that area. And I love that you mentioned the look at the evidence over your life of how you grew from everything you've like failed at and how you've gotten better at things over time too. So I think like you like we're kind of saying, whether you are looking at the evidence of past decisions you made or if you're making new baby little risks, that is building your self-efficacy.
Right. And I think just like, what's the statistical likelihood that in your 20s, you'll never find another job if this one doesn't work out? What's the statistical likelihood that if you walk up to someone in a restaurant and hand them your number on a piece of paper, that no one in your life will ever call you? Those things aren't real, right? They're scary, but it's statistically unlikely that if you start a new career at 25 or give someone your number, that will be the last you ever do. That's that's not how math works.
So real. Okay. Well, I have to just say, Jen, like I love so much like who you are as a person. And the thing that sticks out to me, I guess, with you is your authenticity, if we're being honest. Like, as we were talking about earlier in the episode, my new currency of people is authenticity. And I just feel like you do not sugarcoat things. And I honor you for that. Like, you show up as who you are, you bring humor to the table, and you just have a way of like kind of painting the picture with it, like a no bullshit lens, but in a way that it lands softly every single time. So that is just like, an amazing, I don't know, dynamic you got going on. So keep working at that. And I always love to ask my guests at the end of the show, the name of the podcast is Get Out of Your Own Way. So, first of all, when you hear that phrase, what sticks out to you? What does that mean to you?
You are the only one who can change your life, right? Like, whether it's because you buy that lottery ticket and you win those millions of dollars, or because you try that new job, or because you finally end that relationship, you are the only one who can change your life. You are the person who is in your way. So if you are coming to therapy to talk about everyone else and how they are in your way and they need to change, I will look right at you and say, they are not sitting on my couch. They sound horrible, but they're not sitting on my couch. To get out of your own way, you are the only one who can choose to do that. You cannot wait for someone else to choose to do that. I always say to people, like, if you're telling me you don't want to be single and then I'm asking you how you're meeting people to date and you're saying, well, I don't really leave my house, the only person you're meeting is someone who burglarizes your home, right? You are the only one who can change that. You need to get out of your own way, meaning you need to choose to do the things that are tough or scary or hard. No one is taking that away from you. They are tough, scary, and hard. But otherwise, you're just going to stay where you're at. And if you do, then you chose that.
You chose that, yeah. And I do think, I mean, that's kind of where the title came from, was like, I think one day I was just like, I just can't get out of my own way. I mean, now I hear that all the time, like the red car theory, just like, patients, clients that come and like say that to me. And I think my question for you is, what is a like one practical tip you'd give somebody to help them get out of their own?
I'm a big believer in we often give more logical and practical advice to the people that we love than we give to ourselves because we don't actually fear that the people we love are going to fail. We don't actually fear that if they fail or if they rejected that that's a reflection of them because we know who they are. So we say, well, who cares if that person doesn't like you or who cares if you didn't get that job? I know you're wonderful. We
Yeah.
don't do that to ourselves. So usually what I say is remove yourself as the main character in the problem and put the person you love the most, whether that is your sibling, your parent, your best friend. What's the advice you would give them? That's actually your best advice. You know the answer. We're just not great at applying it to ourselves because we sometimes don't believe in ourselves as much as we believe in the people we love. We know the people we love are going to be okay because we see how great they are. right? So remove yourself, put them in, and then go with that answer. What would you tell your best friend to do? That's what you should do.
Wow. Wow, that's so good. I have nothing to add to that besides that's fantastic advice. And I will probably have to take some of that myself. Okay. So
Please do.
as we wrap up, Jen, where can people connect with you, find you, maybe even work with you?
You can find me on Instagram. It's JL Weaver LLC, or you can email me. It's Jennifer at JLWeaverLLC.
Awesome. Well, I again hope everyone finds something valuable in this episode. I know I did. I loved this conversation so much. So selfishly, I don't care what anyone else thinks. No, I'm kidding. And Jen, you're awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.